have a couple friends literally who left the country, who were born and raised here, and they were like, I'm going to move to Panama. They built their home. They built their home from natural elements, like it's a mud home. It is beautiful. And the entire, like literally the community, the villagers of the area helped them build it during COVID. And they live their best life in Panama, and they teach workshops and stuff online, and they're living that life, and they are not part of this system directly at all. And it's quite amazing.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to MYYT, where you are learning to level up your yoga teaching one masterful class at a time. I am still coming to you from Canada, where I am on tour with my show, Yesterday Once More. It's a tribute to the mamas and papas, the Fifth Dimension, the Carpenters, and ABBA, and I'm having such an amazing time. It's my first time performing really in the last year since being pregnant and giving birth to my first son, Finn. So I'm just really grateful to be back on stage. It feels so good to sing again and to be able to sing not just in the first place, but with my husband. I'm so happy. And Canada is gorgeous, especially this time of year. I'm thinking, wow, it's so green and so lush, especially compared to the desert I usually come from, or I live in Las Vegas. So I'm like, I might just stay because I think it's about 110 plus back home in Vegas. And it's like the perfect 70-degree here. We finished the show, and because we're so far north, it's like 9 p.m. and the sun is just starting to set. So I feel like the days are also really long, it's just nice. I'm like, I could see myself living here. So who knows, maybe in the future I'll live in Canada. I'm just outside of Canada, so a bit out of Toronto. It's this small town called Woodstock, which is so fun. It has also been an extra exciting week because last week I opened the doors for Inspired Flow Monthly, the subscription for yoga teachers that puts ready to go flows in your back pocket. And the response has been overwhelming. It feels so good to create something that's actually helpful. And I know that sounds kind of silly, but I feel like since really stepping away from performance 4 years ago and starting to tune more into this online space and thinking of how I could show up and serve yoga teachers, that it's been a little bit of trial and error for me personally. I've tried a couple of different things and nothing has ever really felt so needed or so well received. And so that's exciting, of course, for me being like, yes, I feel like I've actually started creating something that people need. But it's also, I am feeling like exciting as the receiver too. I've just had a lot of yoga teachers reach out and say, this is such a great idea. This is so unique. This is so helpful. I'm so beyond impressed with what is inside the subscription. And that just feels really, really good. So while I have closed the doors on the founding members, it's no longer possible to be a founding member, which would have added the perk of the bonus library. It's still possible to sign up for Inspired Flow Monthly at any time. And for an upgrade, you can get the bonus library, but it's just not combined in the founders bundle anymore. So I wanted to, instead of the true story submissions, I wanted to read a few of the things that yoga teachers are saying about Inspired Flow Monthly. So listen to a few of these. We have off the charts, beyond what I expected. Wow, I cannot wait. Another yoga teacher, Mia, said, just completed the order of the Inspired Flow Monthly, and I wish you have a great show tonight. Rachel said, so excited for this resource. Thank you for bringing this to us. And Dara said, I'm officially a founding member. So excited. Also, I have those same pants. She commented on an outfit that I was wearing on social media. And this is really what I love. Dara is kind of my number one supporter and cheerleader. So if you're out there listening, Dara, thank you so much. I can't tell you how much it means to me, how vocal you are about how helpful this is. She said, it's so perfect how you give us the topic and inspire, and then we make it our own. And then, of course, in the midst of teaching, it also shifts and shapes in real time. But I just felt so much more confident walking in after reading your materials. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you, Dara, for saying that and being a founding member. I've seen on social media how she's taken the flows and how she's taken the themes and kind of expanded on them from that initial inspiration. And that was my goal with creating this, is like, okay, if I could just give you a little bit of focus and show you how to lay a foundation, how you could build from there. And that's really what is exciting, is that, yes, of course, I'm really kind of only giving you one cohesive class plan, but you could probably take this one idea and from that make 5 or 6 other ideas from this initial little spark. It's like I'm giving you the spark or the kindling, and from there you can really build like a fire or a bonfire. So I'm so happy to hear that it is working, that it is doing that for yoga teachers. And this is just the beginning. This subscription is just starting, and I have the intention to keep designing these cohesive class plans from now until yoga teachers say they no longer need it. If you feel like this is sounding like exactly what you need, all you have to do is head to the show notes. There will be a link that's Inspired Flow Monthly for you to check out. It's got all the information of what's included. And I even wanted to give you just a free sample class. So you can try it free, no strings attached, just to see if it provides the type of class experience that you want to give to your students. Speaking of starting new things, I was toying with the idea of starting to teach. Actually, wait. In light of the conversation with Mayuri, I've been tossing around this idea in my head, and let me know if this sounds like something you would want to do and show up for. I'm thinking I might want to start doing 2 virtual classes a week that are donation-based. One sort of vinyasa or just a flow class, and then one ashtanga class that'll be about 90 minutes, so I have time to do full primary. Does that sound good to you? If it does, I need you to reach out to me on social media. My handle is Master Your Yoga Teaching. It's the same name of the podcast. Let me know if you'd be willing to tune in to these classes, either the flow or the ashtanga. I'm thinking Wednesday mornings. And I'm usually in Pacific time zone, so anywhere between 9 a.m. to about 12 p.m. Back-to-back classes. That's what I'm thinking. So let me know if you would want to take class from me or practice with me on Wednesday mornings virtually. And this would be donation-based because, as you'll hear in the conversation with Mayuri, I'm interested in providing more opportunity for people to take yoga. Speaking of, this conversation is part 2 of 3. So if you missed the episode last week, make sure you go back and catch up before continuing on in this conversation. I continue to chat with Mayuri Bhandari on accidental appropriation and how we all, as yoga teachers, have this responsibility to continue learning, because when we know better, we do better. In this episode, we talk about how yoga teachers perpetuate the problem of associating yoga with feeling good and being peaceful rather than facing discomfort and training. We chat the slippery slope of entitlement and supremacy, the parallels of Jainism in the Yamas and Niyamas, the levels of ahimsa, and not just surface level non-harming. And finally, barriers to practice, such as body image, cost, ageism, and ableism. Now, we recorded all of this as one epic conversation. Mayuri and I chatted for about 3 hours. So we kind of dive into the conversation like right at the top after her introduction and her bio. So buckle up, get ready, and let's dive in.
Hey yogis, MAKENZIE Fly here, mom, yogapreneur, teacher trainer, retreat leader, and your guide to master your yoga teaching. This podcast is your weekly dose of actionable wisdom and candid chats with industry experts. Learn to connect deeper, weave yogic magic, and lead by example. Full disclosure, I'm still mastering it too, but together we'll skyrocket your impact and income. Hit subscribe and let's grow, one episode at a time. Mayuri Bhandari is a professor of yoga at Loyola Marymount University. Her focus as an instructor and practitioner lies in the application of yoga beyond the mat as a way of life. An actress, dancer, figure skater, and storyteller within both American and Indian film industries, Mayuri voices an ahimsic, nonviolent way of life, women's empowerment, and stories of Indian experience and identity. Additionally, she has been a volunteer of prison yoga and meditation at the Twin Towers facility in DTLA. Mayuri holds a BA in Dance and South Asian Studies from UC Berkeley and an MA in Yoga Studies from LMU. She has taught with Arihanta Academy, Lifetime Fitness, and Studio Spaces in Los Angeles. We are so thrilled to have you, Mayuri. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. How I'm receiving it is I'm sitting here feeling like ashamed, but not of myself, of being a part of carrying down this. I guess the word really is just like not thinking, like doing it without thinking. And so what I want yoga teachers to feel is first feel that like embarrassment, like, oh God, maybe I am perpetuating this problem, or because I haven't taken the time to think a little deeper about this, like feel ashamed maybe at first, but then feel like inspired to do stuff differently. So I'm hoping that that's the gist of the conversations and the energy of the conversations. We don't want anyone to listen to this and feel like, well, shit, I'm just a part of the problem, and maybe I should just quit yoga teaching and go do something else. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I want to actually touch on that for a second, because I think what you're saying is really important. I definitely don't want anyone to feel ashamed per se of, like you said very accurately, like not of what they're doing, but like, even the culture as a whole. I think what I more strive for is an awakening, or just awareness. We don't know what we don't know, right? Unless we take active steps to realize in anything that we do that let me try to learn more, that this is deeper than what I am seeing at the surface level. And I think that goes for so many things, but specifically a spiritual practice that has become as popular as it has, like yoga. It's just such a unique case, in the way that it is. And I think we all have ignorance. We all have it. It's not like only a certain group of people have ignorance. Like we all have our own ignorance. And so it's just becoming aware of that ignorance. And I think that hopefully that is what it's more just like, feel like a call to action, like, oh, I want to see things for what they really are, which is exactly what yoga talks about: discernment and clarity of perception and seeing things as they really are. And it's just a part of that. What happens that what we can't ignore is that we are coming from such a colonialist capitalist system, like down that the system that we exist in is usually in that method. So even yoga has been put into that space. You know what I mean? So it's trickling down in that. So it's for us to realize, really not just about yoga. It's awakening to the whole system. It's awakening to seeing all the systems of violence. And that can be very overwhelming, because that's what yoga does. I always say this: yoga ruins your life, because yoga makes you see all the crap more clearly. Not just yoga. It can be through yoga. It can, whatever medium it is for a person. It can be just knowledge, whether it's documentaries or whatever. It's a mode through which you see things. It is, seeing yourself. So the microcosm and the macrocosm, the duality. But like, you're just calling out the ahimsa, the violence that you're doing to yourself, and the violence that you're doing that's happening outside. And whether, even if you're not a direct participant of it, you're indirectly, through your money and through living in the system, are participating in perpetuating it. And so again, the solution for that is, I have a couple friends literally who left the country, who were born and raised here. And they were like, I'm going to move to Panama. They built their home. They built their home from natural elements. Like, it's a mud home. It is beautiful. And the entire, like literally the community, the villagers of the area helped them build it during COVID. And they live their best life in Panama. And they teach workshops and stuff online, and they're living that life, and they are not part of this system directly at all. And it's quite amazing. And I have to say, like, yeah, for some people, it's like, yeah, F it. I'm going to leave. I'm going to peace out, because this is too much. But for a lot of us who are like in this more material or attached, or maybe for whatever XYZ reasons are in this space, it's like, it's not just like, do we do yoga? The question is, do we just even exist? How do we exist in this way of life? That's really the question that it begs to. It's, yes, yoga is one of the things that is being messed with, but really it's ultimately looking at the bigger picture.
Oh, yes. So well said. And welcome back, Mayuri. We are in episode 2 of the series. We just went right into it, which I love. But for those of you that are listening who didn't actually catch the previous episode from last week, we really encourage you to pause and go check out the part 1 in this 3-part series, because the information builds upon one another. We have Mayuri to help us understand the difference between appropriation and appreciation. And really, in the last episode, she helped us understand the beginnings of that. And we spoke about some of the cultural misunderstandings of some of our practices. And this week, we're going to dive even deeper. I would love to talk a lot more about the commodification of it and the commercialization of yoga and the tokenization of some of these rituals even, and stripping away some of the more spiritual or philosophical energies underneath it, and how we can do better. And then I'd love, Mayuri, if you're okay with it, to talk and address how we can make yoga more inclusive instead of exclusive by accident.
I forgot to say in the early episode that, I did mention my short film Bindi for cultural appropriation. And it's like, a great short film. That film is on my YouTube channel. So I feel like it's a great way to understand cultural appropriation. So if anybody wants to see, that short film or learn deeper about the cultural appropriation topic, I think that's a great short film to check out. But I have a couple that we'll talk about as well. But I think there's a series of short films on my YouTube channel, and I think it'll just, for those who are interested, help them and understand that topic a little deeper. So I'm just going to start with that.
Awesome. So with an interesting point that you ended the last episode on was kind of around this idea that initially a lot of people come to yoga, especially in the West, and they see it as a workout, or it's kind of the first thing that gets them in the door. Is that necessarily a bad thing when obviously yoga is spreading, it's becoming more popularized? But if initially it is that more kind of watered down, whitewashed thing, obviously we want people to keep studying and keep learning and go deeper and figure out some of these more deeper layers. But is it a bad thing? I get, like, at least it gets people started, and then they can be on that path, and then their process of continuing their education.
I feel like even in modern postural yoga, like in the past 150 years, post more colonized influenced yoga that did exist after Krishnamacharya, made modern postural yoga very popular, and a lot of the yoga classes that we take today are inspired from the teachers and students of Krishnamacharya for a lot of the part, because he's the one, I think, who was one of the teachers to open it to foreigners. Because until then, a lot of teachers had not shared it outside, like sharing the practices with outsiders. And I think that changed the game a lot, in terms of who were the students, how they took it. And even the history of yoga is very fascinating. To answer your question, I think I don't like, no matter how people take it, it's fine. Like, because unfortunately we don't have enough studio spaces or places that are giving the depth of what yoga is about, or even aware. And so what's happening is it's still this wall of not going further then. So we're just still perpetuating more surface level stuff without actually making any change. Yes, I mean, those who are introduced to it from asana, I understand. I mean, even Krishnamacharya had there was a gymnastic influence on yoga at the time. We don't quite know if it was more colonial inspired or what happened, but the asanas becoming more gymnastic like was a later influence. Not that the postures existed, but I feel like the whole vinyasa, like certain parts of it that made it even more gymnastic-like, was a later addition in a way for some styles. And so I think that, most people are introduced, at least visually, to it from an asana place. But I do feel like the watered down version, the sanitized version, creates more harm than good, because, again, I mentioned earlier that it makes people associate yoga with flexibility and peacefulness and feeling good, rather than actually looking at your discomfort and awakening your ignorance and making change within yourself and the systems that you're a part of, or seeing the outside world for what it really is. And so I feel like it takes away from that, because now people are associating it just with, oh, I have to be peaceful. I can't meditate because I have 1,000 thoughts a minute. And it's like, no, everyone has that. We have to all train, to get there. And I feel like the amount of yoga spaces and yoga people that are there, it doesn't match yoga service output.
It's a really interesting concept, because if it were, to your point, to which I agree, if studios and individual teachers and places were actually presenting it from this standpoint, do you think, number one, that yoga would be as popular, or do you think it would actually detract, or would people be unattracted to it because they don't want to sit with their discomfort? And is that better than what's happening now? Whereas, like, at least in some regard, like, people are attracted to this practice that could bring them a little bit of mechanisms and practices just to manage their stress, learn how to be in control of their emotions. It seems like at the end of the day that as a collective is a good thing for people to have that experience and that benefit from yoga. I guess what I'm trying to say is that, like, at least we're getting more people to know what the word yoga is in the first place, which is the beginning. However, there needs to be a continued earnestness to keep searching and keep directly experiencing it. And that takes a certain type of teacher, that takes a certain type of studio and space. But what do you think about those things?
Yeah, actually, you said so many interesting things. I'm gonna try to go backtrack and remember. So one is that, like, what I mean by yoga, what we have doesn't, the yogis that we have, it doesn't match its service output. What I mean by that is, if people actually practice what yoga was, we'd have activists, we'd have revolutionaries, we'd have a revolution. I mean, yoga's numbers are so high that if it actually was carried out that way, we would have a completely different outcome. Your question was, would yoga's popularity, still be the same? I think it would go two ways. I think it would definitely decrease from a capital, like from a money making, from a business standpoint. It would definitely have a lowering in that section, but it would attract the people that are seeking something deeper. So there are plenty of people who are like, it's too floozy, too surface level. Like, it wasn't really like deep. It wasn't really talking about the depth. It was just, on the top. And so I feel like it would attract the right audience. Actually, there'd be a shift in a way. And so but again, it has to be what everyone takes on and agrees to do. And quite frankly, most people aren't willing to do that, because unfortunately, those who do practice spirituality have this, or yoga, or these type of practices, the more Western ones, have this sense of entitlement. So they're like, I'm a good person because I practice yoga, but they're actually more entitled about it and less resistant to introspection and change. Whereas I actually look at people who don't even practice yoga, they might be more willing to budge or talk or have awareness or look at something of ignorance than people who are, because it feels like I'm a good person because I practice yoga, and therefore they're more entitled because of it. So I find actually the opposite, where I'm just like, no, we'd want, a lot more of the latter. And I say this with experience, because I have had talks with places, with academic spaces that I know, with studio spaces that I know, with, like, different yoga spaces and different genres across different genres. And when I brought up, things about even something as simple as opening the conversation to talk about these things. And this is like, post-COVID stuff, not even too long ago. The conversation, literally the response of these and usually they were white male-led spaces, was like, oh, that's all great, but like, we don't want to talk about that. Or like, we want to make change, but that's too much. Or like, and I'm not saying I have a whole system in place here that has to be implemented right away. I'm not even saying I don't want to be that person. I'm asked a question, and so I'm giving, options as to what those could be, because I'm asked that. or in the academic space, I felt like because I was the only brown person there that I should speak up about that. I feel like the response to that is very resistant and not even willing to have a conversation, let alone make any substantial change. So while that's a wonderful sentiment, in actuality, because of the space and because of what it does, I feel like it actually creates more rigid way of being than open to change. And it was interesting because even when I've heard in teachers talk in spaces when they're like, you can do no wrong, like love yourself. Sure, agreed. In a media space where our bodies are treated a certain way, we should love ourselves and our bodies and be open to loving ourselves as we are. But you can do no wrong. Like, we're setting people up to be like, oh, it sounds like just a nice fluffy thing to say, right? Like, no harm done. But if this is the kind of culture we're pushing in these types of spaces, I'm not saying it's that line alone, but it's stuff like that. What it does is it makes people think, I work on myself, I'm peaceful, I have love, I have compassion, and that's great. But like, I'm not actually introspecting, but because I'm a good person, like, I just have that love, peace, and compassion. Like, these are actual words. Inhale love, exhale compassion. I'm like, one, what does that even mean? And two, how do I inhale love and exhale compassion? That's literally like me saying, grow muscles. You grow. And I say with all the love in my heart, is it going to grow? No, I have to train. I have to go to the gym. I have to have the diet. I have to do the work for the muscle to grow. It's exactly the same with love and compassion. I don't just say it in the studio and it's magically going to happen. I've seen the same teacher yell at the homeless person right outside the studio. So it's like, what are you saying about love and compassion? Yeah, to when everything is nice and feels good, you're nice. But the moment you step outside the door and you're confronted with the least thing that aggravates you or bothers you or triggers you or leads something to you, that love and compassion is not even there for the simplest things, let alone bigger issues. So I see this as a whole. Again, it's just the tip of dangerous, because I don't know if you know this, but post BLM, Black Lives Matter, there were so many Facebook threads that came out for all these yoga teaching spaces. And it revealed how many yoga teachers were aligned with All Lives Matter or QAnon. And that doesn't surprise me for a second. When people were talking about that, I was like, yeah, I called that like 3 years ago. Like, you know what I mean? Like I because of how I see it, I'm like, that makes complete sense. That makes complete sense to me, that it would align with as a tool for supremacy, because it's used as, let me use this to push my own agenda, not intentionally, but it makes people feel more solid about their own views rather than looking at their own biases and judgments and ignorance. And this is where I disagree on it as a whole. Even if it's being exposed to people, I still think it needs more depth, even in the first introduction.
That's so many good things. I feel like people just don't even know how to start to train that muscle, as you say. And that if you were to give like real practical or actionable advice to the yoga teachers listening as to how they can stop perpetuating this problem, what would you say is something they could do to help in their own personal yoga teaching? Because I know you kind of mentioned in our first episode that you're kind of pointing the finger at more of these big companies that are putting on the trainings or taking this role of teaching and spreading yoga. But for us, like not little people, but you know what I mean, for just like us out in the fields, what is something that we can be doing to not keep doing that? I mean,
I'm not like the point person for this. Again, I keep highlighting that because I feel like it's important for me to mention that, like, it's like, okay, well, I go back to where your money is going. Like, I really do. Like, look at where your money is going and like what you're getting yourself involved in, what you're signing up for, and learn deeper than maybe that's the only type of training you can take in your area. Sure, take it, make the most of it, learn more than that. Like, there are plenty of devices online. There's so many things now that were not available 25 years ago, through Spotify, through YouTube, through so many ways to learn, so many meditation places, spaces you can go to that did not exist before. So I think, again, it's like that self-education is super key. Also this understanding of, I think this helps a lot too, is I really don't know anything. Any place that you go to where it's like, this is the way that it is. It's like, anything that's fixated on something, like a specific way or very rigid, that gives you an idea that there's no understanding of there's more than one point of view. There's more than one way. So these are very general things. But I think specifically go to those yamas and those niyamas, and really dive deep into them. And what I mean by this is, if we look at the first 5 yamas, right? Starting with ahimsa. Ahimsa is the most important one. Now, these are inspired from Jainism. Jainism is, I don't know if most people are familiar, but Jainism is a small spirituality. I would say small because of numbers. Currently today, it's less than 1% of India's population. Mighty, but tiny. And so, we are a recognized bunch, but we are very small in numbers, because ahimsa is so key to Jainism. Buddhism and Jainism are very similar. There were 24 teachers in Jainism, and Buddha was basically, like, imagine 24 Buddhas over a long period of time. And the last teacher of Jainism, the 24th teacher, was oh my God, what's the word? It left my brain. Oh my God. When they're in the same generation, when there were teachers at the same time, is what I'm trying to say. There's a word for it, and left my contemporaries. They were contemporaries. So, so what Buddha did was, Buddha kind of tried. Buddha's journey is a very good example of a self, like figuring out your way, because not everything is going to work for every person. It's your experience that's going to work for you. And Buddha tried Hinduism, tried parts of yoga, tried Jain practices, and he found something, but he didn't quite find what he was looking for. He also tried Jainism. He found Jainism a bit too harsh to practice. So he kind of literally made it a more middle path, which is where kind of the middle path comes from in a way. I'm not saying they're exactly the same concept. Philosophically, they're somewhat different, but there was a lot that inspired also from the Jain path, and he made it more palatable, I think, for the average person. And so that's why Jainism and Buddhism are kind of seen as brother-sister spiritualities. But so for people who don't know or aren't familiar with Jainism, now they can have some kind of understanding as to, the origins of how far back Jainism goes and its inspiration to yoga. And so the first 5 yamas and niyamas literally are the same as Jainism, like plopped right in. And so when it comes to ahimsa, or nonviolence, we don't just look at it as a surface level. So when you have ahimsa, you say, okay, yeah, sure, nonviolence. It's not just like thou shalt not kill, right? It's like looking at nonviolence to yourself, nonviolence towards others, the system, in diet, in treatment of sentient beings, in language, in thought, in speech, and so how are we embodying nonviolence? Not just, okay, well, I don't kill anybody, so I'm good. Like, how are we, like, nonviolence to the self is most important. What is that voice in your head? Do you talk to yourself aggressively or in a terrible way when things aren't good? Like real introspection and practice of these levels. I'll give a beautiful story in it later on in regards to ahimsa. So I like embodying ahimsa later on. But so that's one example of like, okay, ahimsa, how do I talk to myself? How do I talk with others? Now, some people may say, okay, well, do you have to be vegan or vegetarian to practice yoga? Because nonviolence is the first limb. If we can't even get through the first limb, how are we going to go everywhere else? And that's not to say that every yogic practice talks about that you have to have a vegan or vegetarian diet. I think it is heavily influenced as a yoga practice because of the roots being from nonviolence. For Jains, it most definitely is. For a lot of Hindus, it is. For some Buddhists, it is. For some Sikhs, it is. It depends on the background. But there's different yogic practices like Tantra who engage the world through the senses, not withdrawing from the senses, but engaging through the senses to find that liberation. So it's the exact opposite, but they both use self-discipline. So they do it. They engage in everything to be able to not be attached to anything. So even the disgusting things, all of that, right? So that's the goal is the same, but the method is different. And so I can't say that, yes, you have to be vegetarian and vegan. But a lot of the practices, at least as far as the Yamas and the Niyamas are concerned, when it's talked about ahimsa, it is looking at, are we really giving nonviolence and compassion to all beings, to insects, to animals, to plant life, how we're treating the elements, the same things that indigenous people and different native people say in this country and all parts of the world, same conversations. They literally parallel. The teachings could not be more yogic, and I'll get into that as well. It's really amazing. But I think really taking something as simple as ahimsa and like going through all the levels of it, because I don't think we quite understand our hypocrisy and our bias and our judgment that lies in something as simple as that. So like, I'm not saying that, okay, everybody's got to be vegan, vegetarian. I understand cultures and indigenous practices, and people would work with the land that they had. So if you're living in Tibet and you can't grow crops and all you've got is some animal and maybe a few other things, I understand where they're using, the animal to the best of their ability. They're doing the best thing that they can given what they have, but they're not having this agro farming industry that is producing so much methane, ruining the land, using so many, like what we're living in today in the cities is not that. So I'm not accusing those people who are barely surviving or who it's their responsibility for everyone to be doing this. Not at all. But those of us who are and have the privilege, and we're in an era where we have everything available to us, that's a different conversation. So I look at speciesism, right? How do we have so much love? We say, I love flowers, right? Or I love animals. And when we look at something as simple as I love flowers, okay, do you love the flowers or do you love the smell of dead, cut, killed flowers, right? What are we talking about when we use the word love? Because you don't love that flower. If you love the flower, you would let it be. You would admire it from afar, smell it from afar. Love isn't killing and destroying the other for your own sake. That's attachment. That's not love. And so same with animals. I love puppies. I love cats. Well, what makes, a farm animal so different aside from tradition of being food? And, people will say all the time, well, lions eat meat and, it's our tradition and culture. And this always cracks me up because I'm like, there's a whole part of the world that has been vegetarian. We always forget that. It's like not the whole world has been non-veg for all of eternity. Like there are other parts of the world that have been veggie for a long time. A long time. Now, of course, given what they had on the land, I get it, and their body type and et cetera, et cetera. What I'm saying is that we have to look at how we see love and compassion and how we use these simple words and how we use ahimsa and how it applies to us, because it's not something that's just like simple as like, it seems like such a simple concept, but it's so much deeper than that. So if people really just take something as simple as that and say, I'm going to study that and see what my thoughts and feelings are that come up out of that, my self-reflection that comes out of that. Because there is immediate like rebuttal, self-defense of the self to be like, oh, well, you're killing plants. So like, are you going to like, aren't you hurting plants too? Yes, absolutely. But I'm not killing the tree to get the apple. Like, do you get what I'm saying? Like, it's like the least amount of harm as possible. And how can I mitigate to the best of my ability? Because even I had to check myself because I was like, dang, I didn't realize when I was younger, because we look at nonviolence, not just in diet, but profession, what type of job you're in, the clothing that you wear, the shoes. So OG veganism is how I look at it. But like, I was like, oh, my skates are made of leather, like my figure skates. And I didn't realize that till I was much older. Now you can get vegan figure skates. Back in the day, you couldn't. But I didn't, because it doesn't exist in India. My parents and I, we didn't even think that like, oh my God, my figure skates are made of leather. So like how we have to constantly, like most Jains turned vegan in America because the same system wasn't happening in India with cows that was happening here. And so we had to check ourselves. Like I was educated through the yoga certification on that book, World Peace Diet by William Tuttle from Berkeley. And I discovered the dairy industry. I didn't even know what was happening, though I've been raised in Jainism and blah, 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 like all of that. So we just learn by learning. So educating ourselves on these systems of violence through these different, through the different yamas and the niyamas beyond just their surface level or the way that we're taught about them in teacher trainings. That's quite convenient and just translated in a very like not depthful or multi-interpreted way. And that's how we look at applying something as simple as that. And that's where I would start as for people to be like, well, how can I self-study? Really look at that and educate yourself on what's going on in your local community, in your environment, on your land. Know the history of your land, of the indigenous peoples of the land, how we can support that, the fact they don't have clean water. Where does our water go? Where does our voting go? Like, it's just it's crazy that we have to go out of our way to care. And it sucks because that's not part of the system. You have to have money and privilege and time, and you have to go out of your way to even compost something or, have like recycle. Not only 9% of things get recycled. I could talk about that. Like, it's really an awakening of how much there is. And that's where we would start, honestly. And along with, that's the outward, and then your inward own practice that kind of gets away from all of the external, because it's overstimulating. The amount of information we have on the internet, social media, how many sad things are happening in the universe, we become numb. We need a trigger warning for the truth. Like, it's crazy that it's the trigger warning is for the truth, not the other things. Like, it's insane to me, but that is where it's at. So it's not to say that one individual has to be like, I'm going to change everything. That's crazy. We'd all go insane. I go insane almost all the time. But it's like, let me sit with one yama at a time. Let me embody it. How can I be better? What's one thing I make as a part of my new habit, my new sanskara every time? And it's just education. And that, unfortunately, the system is not designed for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. You were really on a roll.
Sorry. I went off. But I was coming to a point.
No, it's so good. And I think when we talk about, like, when you mentioned that some of these companies will bring up these topics and they're like, actually, let's not open that can of worms, because it feels like once you start like looking under the rug that you've realized how much you've kind of swept under there and just kind of like pushed all the mess in the closet and closed the door kind of feeling. So it can feel when you start to use yoga, and especially the yamas and niyamas, like you're mentioning, as these scopes or as these filters to look at your life through, it can reveal, it almost feels like your life gets a whole lot messier before it gets cleaner. And that can feel like a really daunting task for the individual as well as the collective. So I think that's where the comes, because it feels like such a task. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm just saying that even when we have this conversation right now, you're like, well, gosh, it doesn't feel like I can alone achieve it. And so then it just feels like, how do I start? When do I start? I'm not going to start. But one thing that you mentioned that I wanted to really touch on, and maybe you can help me remember who said this. I feel like it might have been both of our teachers. But as far as like the Sanskrit word ahimsa, himsa being harm, and then the A in front of it, you might be able to educate me even further on it. But from what I know at this time, it's not just the concept of non-harming. The A also completely negates it, right? And makes it become the actual opposite. So if there's harm, then what is actually the opposite of harm? Is it non-harming, or is it actually maybe helping and serving? And so when you think of it that way, that it's actually calling on us as people practicing yoga, and even people trying to teach yoga, that it's that principle of like leaving something better than how you found it. Or if you can't do that, then at least just not making things worse. So that takes a whole other level of awareness and even discernment. And then, like you're saying, better participation, which takes a lot of effort. So what do you think about that?
I think it's a beautiful way of putting that in a way that, it's like not just non-harming, but helping. And seva, service as a concept, is a big part of yoga to begin with. Social justice. There's different types of yoga, right? We have bhakti yoga, more devotional; karma yoga, more yoga of social justice and action and service. You have jnana yoga, which is more philosophy and intellect and academia, as the type of yoga. So you have so many modes through which this can go through. I think there is also power in observance and stillness. And I feel because absolutely, I think adding this care, this service to it is beautiful. And I think it's a great way for most people here to interpret that. But it can feel like a lot of work. I think a great starting point is just being like, let me notice it first, because we can't take action if we don't see it to begin with. So I think it allows for a moment of pause to be like, oh, wow, or not defend ourselves. We feel very much like we have to defend our actions and why we do what we do, rather than saying, hey, let me not take that personally. Let me just like observe that for a second and be like, oh, dang, the more you know, or like, I could do that differently, or maybe, and so I think it's more that like noticing, reflecting on that first before feeling the need to I got to do the solution right away, which we are very solution oriented in general. I get that as a culture and or strive to be like, let me find solutions. But I think sometimes just sitting with understanding that what it is first. And then of course, if that means you add on, absolutely, like that can look like, because when it comes to, at least I think the best example I can give for what you're talking about is the concept of ahimsa, but in relation to self-defense or defense for others. Because in Jainism, a lot of the questions come up where like, okay, if we're supposed to be nonviolent to a T, some nonviolent people wouldn't even, if they were attacked, whatever, they'd let themselves die. Like they wouldn't even defend themselves. And some people are like, but wait, what if they're harming somebody else, or they're killing innocent people, or they're attacking and raping or abusing? Like, well, what about, how does that change then? So what if you have to intervene with violence to protect that nonviolence? You know what I mean? Like, or and so it becomes very interesting. So that's where I think that what you're saying, like taking an action, really comes into play, because I think it's an individual choice. I don't think there's like a wrong, like you must do something, not do something. But of course, it's natural in us to not have to hinder further violence, to intervene. And so that's a best example I think I see of like where that's an immediate like, oh, I'm doing something about that. Or like, and there are many examples of that. It's not just like a direct violent action. But yes, I think that's a beautiful way. I haven't thought about it exactly in that way before. And I think that's a very good way of putting it. So it's more active and not passive.
Yeah. And I can't take credit for it. A teacher shared it with me. And I think something that you're saying is making me think of really just intention behind the tool or kind of object that you're using. It's making me think of that analogy of like a knife, right? It's just an object. But a burglar coming into a place to steal something and stabbing somebody with a knife is creating a lot of harm. But that same knife could be put in the hands of the doctor, and the doctor wielding this knife on a person, a patient, it's still cutting somebody, but the intent behind and the person that's using it and wielding it in a specific way is the difference between like hurting and continuing that harm, or using this tool for good and healing is one thing that came up for me. But to make the to make it a little bit more like actionable for the listeners, as far as not perpetuating this problem of whitewashing the tradition or continuing this tokenization of the yoga practices, I want to bring awareness, like you're mentioning, to three kind of main things that I feel like commercialization yoga has issues, or that we could do better with. And the first is really like perpetuating a certain type of body, like perpetuating body dysmorphia from the imaging and the pictures that we get of like what a yoga practice looks like, what a yogi looks like. I want to talk about cost. Cost is a barrier. And lastly, I feel like that there's a lot to be said on ageism and ableism, and that those three things, that the more awareness that we bring to it and the more specific things that we could discover here today in this conversation could help us not whitewash or fitness wash this sacred tradition as much.
First of all, I want to say, I just wanted to, because I remember when you were talking about asana, that most people will connect through asana because, we have a body. We have a body. And because we have a body, we're going to connect through, most of us, not everyone. Most of us are going to connect through the movement of the body first to be able to go in. So I understand how asana became popular, because it's the most direct way of, it's the most interesting and dynamic way of getting in, But I think it's really interesting how, and it makes total sense to me why yamas and niyamas were practiced for so long before asana was even started.
Yeah.
because until you were not understanding the yamas and the niyamas, the asana did not have value yet.
Wow.
Did not have as much depth and brevity yet. And so I just wanted to add that point. But to the three that you were talking about with body, now let me start with this. This is very interesting. If you scroll on TikTok today and people are like, well, what's the big deal? Like, why is this being even talked about? If you scroll on TikTok today, just type yoga. If you type just yoga in and you scroll on the videos that pop up, everything is literally ass. Like it's just pictures of crotches, and it has become so hypersexualized. And it is so much about that Lululemon fit with the thin body, with this. I don't even know how that became seen as the yoga, like the yoga type. You know what I mean? Like when you type in yoga today, you will see most likely a figure of a very thin, able-bodied white woman as the figure of what yoga is, and that's usually what people associate it with.
How can we first become aware of that, respect it, and then perpetuate it? And how can we shift the focus more to the inner experience rather than this outward appearance? Because I am that stereotype. I am this tall, white, skinny woman. And that was like the catalyst for me reaching out to you, because I never once in my yoga teaching career felt shy about, like, I can't do anything. I am this person. You know what I mean? I can't change my who I am and my nature and my appearance. However, I realized that there is that stereotype and that I fit that description. And so when I went to launch the podcast and like working on my cover art photo, I was just like, oh my gosh, I feel ashamed of I've never felt ashamed of myself, but I'm scared in putting my picture on a podcast picture art that's called Master Your Yoga Teaching, that people are going to see me and judge me because I am a white woman and I'm skinny and I'm able-bodied and I'm everything that we're talking about right now that isn't what yoga is. So how do I, fitting into that imagery, how do I move forward with grace and respect, being myself, but at the same time honoring something that has completely changed my life and served my life for the better, so much so that it is now my passion, my dharma, and my career.
Yeah, I think so. I think words also have a big thing here, which I'll get into as far as when the question comes for you, phrasing. I think people are so quick to, I'm not saying you specifically, just in general, people are so quick to make it a business. Like, okay, I'm a master, I am a teacher, I am, like this is a quick sell. How do you do blah, 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 blah. Not even if that's people's intention, but it's framed in such a transactional sense. Like you are going to achieve something, or you will get there, you will be here. And so I think automatically the first thing is having things labeled or talked about as we're curious, we're having a discussion. We are not, the masters or the authority people on this. Let's like invite the space. I think that's one. I don't want anyone to ever feel, and no one ever should feel ashamed because of, like because that you are white and you are skinny and we are both dancers. So like we're naturally gonna be flexible. Like it's just like, you know what I mean? Like that's not like it's like those are not the things that I would want anyone to feel ashamed for. I think that what has happened is, it over time as it became popular with gurus entering the space, and in the 60s Beatles made yoga super famous. Like all these celebrities went to India and had their spiritual awakening. And it's so interesting how yoga did become popular in the West in the late 1900s, and it attracted a lot of white women who were going to see these gurus, and asanas and the style of movement does attract women more than men, I think, as a whole, in terms of what it does for the body and aesthetically, and where the body can go. And it can be seen, even though we know that it's not flexibility, it's strength, and finding the optimum level of balance between strength and flexibility. It kind of did land itself on the majority population, white women, and who it was attracting, and white men as well. As far as it goes with how can we make it more inclusive of body types and different people, this is going to probably hit most of your the things that you were asked, the sections that you were asking, or you brought up. And I think first and foremost, one of the biggest things is the space that's created, and is, what is our goal? Is it to, is it to be in stillness? Is it to focus on breath? Or is it to just go through the postures, right? Yes, the postures are going to have a physical side effect that feels great, but automatically, if certain bodies feel limited in those spaces, we want to cultivate a space that makes them feel like something as simple as, which most teachers do anyway, providing modifications, not making it as it's a teaching style. But from a physical standpoint, like visual, clothing is huge. If people think that yoga clothing is this tight Lululemon wear, which it's not, I could say that for eons. Like Lululemon has nothing to do with yoga. If anything, Lululemon is the opposite of yoga. And I will go into that in a second. All yoga wear has nothing to do with yoga. So let me just say that. 1. 2, traditional yoga clothing is loose and cotton and breathable, inexpensive, hopefully hand spun and ethically made. And it's supposed to allow your body to breathe. And in my classes where I teach at university, every semester I have many batches of students, and their first question is like, what do we wear? And I'm like, anything you want, anything that you can move in. And I want it to be like, it doesn't have to be super loose or super tight. Like most of my students come in with their loose pants and their plain little shirt. And I don't have a single student who's coming in with their stretchy gym fitness wear. If they want to, they can, but they usually don't want to, and so, I think that's one, when you have that kind of space that doesn't seem like a bit pretentious and like all about the aesthetic, when it's the exact opposite, that's automatically going to make a lot of more people feel comfortable, that because they think that is the attire, that is the clothing required to do that practice, which is like far from the truth, right? So that's one. I think that is a big part of bodies. Also, the ability of thinking that the postures, doing those postures and the levels of asana, like, Ashtanga A, B, C, like there's this thing that the better you do the postures, the better you are. And it's like, just because you do the postures well doesn't mean you're a better person. Like, let's just get that straight. Okay. So the yoga journey for an individual has nothing actually to do with the advancements of postures. So if a person knows that, oh, I don't have to look like this flexible or this really, really be really good at the movement to be good at yoga. I think that also invites people, when it's more about, my students love, even though the asana benefits them, they love breathing more. Pranayama is way more popular in my class. And meditation is way more emphasized. So asana portion should be reduced, and pranayama and conscious breathing, it's not just breath work, even though people associate it to just breath work. We know it's not just that. And meditation is given way more time because they realize, oh, it's not really, that's just prep for this. So really it's about this. So if we emphasize this to be more about that, that's going to change where the focus goes. And that's going to invite a lot more people of different ages, backgrounds, abilities. Blocks and straps weren't even used back in the day. It's great that they're there, but then people become dependent on it. That's another thing, but it's helpful. It's great. People use chairs, all that. So I think that will also help with, where does the culture of a yoga class, right? And what type of people are we including? When it comes to the cost, I mean, we were talking earlier about how expensive things are. Why are they feel only for the elitist and the privileged? Why are classes $40? If this is supposed to be about yoga, which is exactly the antithesis of really money and these ways, why is it the most expensive thing? Why is yoga clothing, yoga regalia, yoga candles, which isn't even a thing, but it is, yoga foods, Ayurveda, co-opting Ayurveda, selling turmeric? It's turmeric, it has an R, but sure, turmeric, right? So I'm like, when I hear that, I'm like, uh-oh. Like I hear words and I'm just like, it's okay. It's okay. So when you people trying to patent turmeric, I'm like, I can't even, so it's just, I say that, like, why is it not available in low income areas? Why is, where I was teaching prison yoga project and meditation at the prison in LA, downtown LA, that had to be done by volunteers. They have the money. We know the prison system. A lot of people are aware of the American prison system and what it is. But they want the retention rate of people to go back to prison, so they don't want to give these programs. These people like us are volunteering our time. They have funding, but they're not giving funding for these programs. And the benefits are shown by enough studies and research, from Prison Yoga Project to so many different. So, why is it not as common in low income areas? Why is it not as available? Why is there a lack of color? Because quite genuinely, it has been co-opted by white culture, and it is not allowed. It is not it's not inclusive of the origin voices, let alone other people of color, right? And so again, I say, if we look at yoga for what it is, what it's supposed to do, then we would way have it more available for people of color, for low income. It would be more affordable. It would be donation based. It wouldn't be about making money. And then people would say, well, oh, well, we invite people. It's about one love. We don't see color. That already is a problem. We don't see color is not actually seeing the issue for what it is. We are not one color. That's a fact. We have different stories. We have different atrocities and traumas. We have different history. We have different equity. And because of that, we are not all the same. And that's okay to just to see that and acknowledge that for what it is, so we can make the changes. But the problem is people aren't even willing to acknowledge the issue. Therefore, how can we go about making the changes in the reparation if the problem isn't acknowledged or seen in the first place?
So good. I was recently having a conversation specifically around the money with Ruby Chandler. She was another podcast guest recently, and she owned a studio, and she was talking about the way in which that she made this applicable and actually tangible in her studio was to not make a perk for paying in full. And that if you needed to do a payment plan, that it wasn't like tacking on a bunch of interest, because the people who need more help end up paying more, and the people who can pay in full really don't need the benefit anyway. And so that was like one actionable way that the studio tried to kind of level the playing field as far as including people that really are fighting finances and have that cost as a barrier for access. So what I'm hearing from you is other ways that yoga teachers can make it more available and accessible to all people, no matter their money situation, is to do more volunteer work, to try to implement some more volunteer in some of your offerings. And what about like offering other scholarships? Like if you do a retreat or run a yoga teacher training, can you offer a scholarship to one person? If they go through some sort of interview process or they write in a letter, what other ideas do you have as far as helping it not be so expensive all the time, but also still very much if some people, this is their livelihood, how do they do both, like keep earning an income, but then also try to meet some people where they are?
That's really tough, because I also, not fully, but part of my income does come from teaching yoga. Like I'm in the same, and I don't want it to be, but it is, but it's not everything, but it is part. And, but that's as a university, like in a philosophy, it's not like a studio teaching, but, it still is part, it's a part of it. There's so many ways I think that people can do that, but I feel bad for people who are barely earning anything to have to, like, and that's where I'm like, unfortunately, I want to be like, maybe not have yoga be your only job. You know what I mean? Because if you want to have it affordable, but at the same time, you can't live off of it. It's like, it's a tough thing. I really call out the spaces that do have the money, call out the people that do have the money. And I know it's not like our job to be like, I'm going to call out everybody else, like all you other people with money. Like I'm not saying, but it really is like, I think what you're saying is great, like providing scholarships, or, maybe do it in a space where you don't have to rent out a whole studio for the training. Maybe you do it in your own spaces. Maybe you don't, where it would be expensive to run certain things, do it outside, if you can, or, figure out ways to like cut expenses maybe in one way where it allows you, like if you can teach in a park, and have people go outside instead of renting a facility, if that's what you're doing, like that gets people interacting with the land or the beach or wherever you are. And that's a great way for you to get more income, but then them to have to pay less. There's just different ways, I think, but that might not be feasible for everyone, for many factors. But I think there are many ways. I don't know. I don't know if I'm the right person to ask for, different ways in which people can, but I don't know if the answer quite lies in people who are already earning less to feel that they have to offer it for less. I think it's a great way to just be like, available to all. For those who can't pay this rate, talk to me, or we can, I don't want to deny anyone because they can't pay this. I think that's a great way to still, have people come.
That's perfect. And it doesn't need to be a long list of answers. That one answer is succinct and perfect. And so I really hope all of us adopt that from now on, because you don't think of it. And that's what this whole series is about. This whole conversation is about, is bringing more awareness to where you could add in these little things that make massive changes. Maybe not in the big picture, but the energy in which you are presenting and sharing yoga, which I think makes all the difference.
I just wanted to add that also know who your audience is. If you're saying, I want to offer it more for people of color or low income or marginalized oppressed groups, you're going to have to go to them. You know what I mean? Like, it's not as easy or accessible. Again, accessibility is huge. And also there's stigmas around what it is, stereotypes around what it is. It is usually more associated with, being a certain way, a certain type of people, a certain vibe with what yoga is. And so it doesn't feel as inclusive or available to so many other backgrounds. And so you kind of have to go out of your way to hold it in schools or spaces or programs or in communities or actual locations where those people would be able to attend more easily.
Okay, here's a question for you then. Do you feel like it would be received well if it's coming from somebody who is not that stereotype? Like, let's say somebody of privilege and who's in a position of power, who's white, tries to put on a flyer or an Instagram post or whatever and say, I would love to host a class for this X, Y, and Z, and there may be other minorities. Don't you feel like some people would be like, that person doesn't have any business leading that, and that it needs to come from somebody who fits that identity so that the person feels safe? It feels awkward, right? To be like, it just makes me think of this. It's an incredible TED Talk where it's like, I'm going to completely butcher it, but he's saying something to the effect of like, oh, I hate being in my position of power, as I say, from my position of power kind of thing.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, actually, because that's very, very important. I think that if one has the intention to, and not just intention, but awareness of the realities of what it takes. And I'd say work with someone who does know the area. Find a teacher of that background who is either familiar with or does work there, or you talk with people. So I always say this with anything that you're a part of, like, join the community, join someone from the community, and they will let you know what's what. Do you know what I mean? Like, whether this is great, whether this is a good idea, or maybe you can work something out together where it's like, this stuff wouldn't be great to work with them, but this stuff might. Maybe breath work alone for when they have a certain thing come up is good enough. We don't need to go through XYZ things. Like I say, meet with the actual people, who are either in the space running it, whatever, or teaching, or invite a teacher from that background, to teach with you, or, not be the head spear of it, but be a person who's an ally. And I think that would be the way to approach it, I would guess.
That's great advice. So then, to conclude, what do you feel like about ageism and ableism? How do we make it more accessible in that regard?
I feel like, quite frankly, the West is more accessible than the East in these matters. Because not from an ageism standpoint, but from an ableism standpoint. I think because I feel like the West in general, at least America, has more facilities and more, even something as simple as parking and routes and accessibility for different abilities of people is way more than is the option in modern post-colonized India. It may have been that way before as well, but like, at least right now, the way India is, it is much harder for different ability people to even get other places, let alone do the practice itself in certain spaces. So I think that over here, if people want to allow for that inclusivity, how do we get people either interested? How do we have maybe more of those aware of type of trainings? Because there's, yoga for addiction, yoga for trauma. There's all these different certifications. Now, I don't even know who leads them, how they come about, who determines what movements are okay, because that's not necessarily more Indian derived. Those are things that I think are very great ways of the practice evolving. to become more accessible for, I think that's beautiful ways of it evolving, how accurate they can be sometimes may differ. But in terms of like ageism, I feel like I haven't been around spaces where I've seen too much of that. My mom goes to like a senior citizens class and she loves it. She loves her senior citizens yoga because she's 60 and she's tiny and she's adorable and she's more flexible than she realizes. But she loves her like class with 80-year-olds and 90-year-olds. Like they love their class. They're super slow and super technique focused. She loves her teachers. She's like, Mayuri, they teach better than you. And I'm like, that's great, mommy. I love that. Like I'm so happy. So I feel like there are classes I've seen for like senior citizen stuff who like love, really it's the teachers. I've seen these teachers and they're fantastic teachers. And, they're just making it accessible for their community and their classes are super popular. You have this class of like 50, 80-year-olds, like just up in there working it out in, their best way. So I don't know in which ways, maybe you can give me an example on ways you see that classes can be ageist.
That's kind of where I see it is like the mislabeling. And I guess this is really from the lifetime lineage that I'm so much a part of not labeling stuff as beginner, intermediate, or advanced, which I do see like could make some sort of hierarchy and that there's not really any of that. But then sometimes when somebody of a certain level comes into a class that's labeled as like a gentle experience, and then the class is super hard, and then that person feels like they weren't able to participate. And I guess maybe more in that context is how I see it. Or somebody who is older coming into like a studio and they feel like they're in this room full of 20-year-olds and they're Lululemon and they just don't feel welcome. And so how can we be aware of that and then be better stewards of the yoga tradition so that we address maybe the awkwardness of it? And that's probably the answer with all of these conversations is having the confidence to say, this is happening. I see that this is happening. You're not the only one that's sitting here thinking this is weird and this is not what I thought yoga was.
Yeah, no, and actually most people who think that are actually right on the nose. It's funny because I think that the problem lies a lot with this whole vinyasa thing. First of all, people just label anything vinyasa. They're like, and they call things yummy yin. And like, I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, people have made a joke out of vinyasa. And I'm like, they're doing anything and everything in vinyasa. And I'm like, okay, like we need to just understand what we're calling asana and asana inspired stuff and what we're calling, because I won't even get into beer yoga, goat yoga, all of those. That's a whole other, but I understand from an Ashtanga or level standpoint in terms of ability, why beginning, intermediate, and advanced is helpful. But if it's clear on like an Ashtanga style, I totally see why that could be labeled that way. If it's sticking to more traditional sequencing and all of that, I understand. In terms of like for a class for people to be able to go into, I think that there again needs to be less emphasis on asana. Like there needs to be less emphasis on this vinyasa thing and, heated, non-heated, cardio, like all these soft, like hard, like let's just keep things simpler and not so like spread out. But I think if we just allow for yoga to be brought down more from this hyper movement fitness thing, I think that'll automatically make it more inclusive. And it can be more intense, physically intense. It's just that, if we give the emphasis to, because what happens in class often is, here's level 1. If you want to do modifications, you stay on the beginner level and then you can add on and add on. So people feel like, oh, that's the advanced level, rather than saying, this is the best thing possible. If you know the more intense sequence that you want to sweat, you go ahead, but it's not emphasized to do that. And I think that that'll automatically allow the people who want to go and do that, they can, but we're giving more importance to the stillness and the simplicity rather than the other way around.
Excellent. Yeah. And it's really practical, which I think is the most helpful, especially within the context of this conversation and the podcast, is like, what are some actionable things that I can do after listening to this? And I think that that's a really great tip. Mayuri, thank you so much for coming on for week 2 of our appropriation versus appreciation and helping us understand how the yoga in the Western culture is commercialized, and how we can be the stewards of this in a way that's not perpetuating exclusivity, and more about inclusivity and accessibility. So thank you so much. I cannot wait for the third and final episode in this series that will be happening next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. If this is your first time, peruse our feed to see if there's something else that will serve you. We're so grateful that you're here and invite you to join our inner circle by subscribing to our newsletter. If this episode resonated with you, help us spread the word by sending it to a friend who needs to hear this message. Likes, follows, sends, shares, and reviews help us to continue delivering high-quality content to you for free each and every week. Don't forget to tag @MasterYourYogaTeaching so we can reshare. I am a certified yogi. However, this podcast is intended for information and entertainment only. If you are interested in mentorship or coaching with me, check out the website linked in the show notes to get more information. This content and other content produced by CLW Studios and affiliated partners is not therapy, and nothing in this content indicates a therapeutic relationship. Any opinions of guests on the podcast are their own and do not represent the opinions of MAKENZIE or CLW Studios. Learn more about MAKENZIE, her guests, and CLW Studios by following the links in the show notes. Keep shining, and we will see you next Wednesday for another dose of Master Your Yoga Teaching. Namaste blessed. Are you feeling stuck? If so, this is your exclusive invite to Vortex Yoga Retreat in Sedona, Arizona, this October 11th through 14th, 2024. Sedona's breathtaking red rocks transform into a fiery masterpiece in the autumn. Imagine practicing yoga amidst this stunning backdrop, feeling the ancient vortexes amplify your intentions and awaken your spirit. This retreat is for you if you crave a deeper connection with your energetic body, the chakras, you're ready to align your life with purpose and passion, or you seek a transformational experience to unleash your inner power. Here's what awaits you. 4 days and 3 nights nestled in Sedona's beauty, daily yoga and meditation, delicious local dinners, sound healing, hiking to infamous Sedona vortexes, connection with like-minded souls on this empowering journey, learn chakra balancing principles and practices, and a special gift from your hosts. Don't wait. Space is extremely limited and spots are going fast. Visit rachakaretreats.com/Sedona to book your spot and choose your accommodations, or click the link in the show notes. Use code MYYT for 10% off. Are you ready to balance your energy and align your life?